Smithsonian versus Trump. The battle for Space Shuttle Discovery's home. Imagine this. The Smithsonian Institution, custodian of Space Shuttle Discovery, is standing firm against President Trump's big, beautiful bill, which aims to relocate the iconic spacecraft to Houston. But here's where it gets controversial. Can Congress really force the Smithsonian to give up Discovery? And this is the part most people miss. The legal and logistical hurdles are monumental. The saga began with the Bring the Space Shuttle Home Act, introduced by Texas Senators John Cornyn and Ted Cruz in April. Their intention was to move Discovery from the Smithsonian's Stephen F. Udvar-Hazy Center outside Washington, D.C., to NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston. Despite initial setbacks, the act was revived and incorporated into Trump's sprawling Big Beautiful Bill, allocating $85 million for the transfer and a new facility in Houston. However, the Smithsonian is not backing down. They argue that Congress lacks the legal authority to mandate Discovery's removal. The institution claims it received all rights, title, interest, and ownership of the shuttle from NASA in 2012, making it part of their National Air and Space Collection, which they hold in trust for the American public. During a Senate Appropriations Committee hearing, Illinois Senator Dick Durbin raised eyebrows by proposing an amendment dubbed Houston, We Have a Problem. He accused Texas of trying to do it over again and make sure they win this time, suggesting it was a heist rather than a legitimate transfer. Although he withdrew his amendment, Durbin emphasized the need for transparency. The legal waters are murky. As a trust instrumentality, the Smithsonian operates independently but receives funding from Congress. Legal precedents indicate that artifacts donated to the Smithsonian become its property, not federal property. This means no one has ever before attempted to forcibly take a Smithsonian display. The Congressional Research Service, CRS report, further complicates matters. It questions whether NASA has the authority to transfer vehicles owned by non-NASA entities, like the Smithsonian. Additionally, the logistics of moving Discovery are daunting. The mate-to-mate devices used to fly shuttles on Boeing 747s were dismantled in 2014, leaving limited and costly alternatives for transportation. Even short trips pose significant challenges. Endeavor's 2012 journey through Los Angeles required extensive planning and infrastructure modifications. For Discovery, dismantling its current exhibit, ensuring safe transit corridors, and maintaining controlled environmental conditions are crucial steps. NASA and the Smithsonian estimate the total relocation cost could exceed $305 million, far surpassing the $85 million allocated. The CRS report breaks down the costs, including $50 to $55 million for transportation and $325 million for constructing a new exhibit and modifying facilities. In conclusion, while the Big Beautiful Bill attempts to move Discovery to Houston, the Smithsonian remains steadfast in its position. The legal and logistical complexities make the transfer a formidable challenge, raising questions about the feasibility and appropriateness of the proposed action. What do you think? Should Congress have the power to dictate the transfer of a national treasure? Share your thoughts in the comments. Shuttle Discovery's costly move, Texas versus Smithsonian. The debate over relocating the Space Shuttle Discovery from its current home in Virginia to Houston has ignited a fiery discussion about costs, historical significance, and precedent. At the heart of this clash is not just money, but also pride, history, and what it means to preserve America's space legacy. But here's where it gets controversial. Should taxpayer dollars fund such a move? And does Houston truly deserve to be Discovery's final resting place? Let's unpack this complex issue step by step. Discovery, which began its storied career in 1984, holds a special place in NASA's history. Over its lifetime, it spent an impressive 365 days in space, making it the most heavily used orbiter in the fleet. When the shuttle was retired in 2011, it found a permanent display at the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum, Stephen F. Udvar-Hazy Center, near Washington, D.C., after a ceremonial flight over the nation's capital in 2012. Now, Texas lawmakers are pushing hard to bring Discovery to Houston, home of NASA's Johnson Space Center and Mission Control, a location they argue is central to America's human spaceflight achievements. Texas Senators John Cornyn and Ted Cruz managed to include a provision in the reconciliation law that authorizes and funds the relocation. The legislation allocates $85 million for the project, with at least $5 million earmarked specifically for transporting the shuttle. Supporters see this as a way to honor Houston's critical role in space exploration, while inspiring future generations. Houston has long stood at the heart of America's human spaceflight program, Cruz stated, emphasizing how bringing Discovery to the region would highlight the city's contributions and showcase America's leadership in space. However, conflicting cost estimates have cast doubt on whether the allocated funding is sufficient. According to a report from the Congressional Research Service, CRS, the Smithsonian Institution estimates that moving Discovery could cost between $50 million and $55 million just for transportation alone. Add to that another $325 million needed for preparing the museum to remove the orbiter and constructing a new facility elsewhere, far exceeding the $85 million provided. This discrepancy raises serious questions about feasibility and financial responsibility. A spokesperson for the Smithsonian explained that Discovery is a fragile object requiring specialized handling procedures originally designed by NASA. These protocols go beyond typical museum standards, underscoring the complexity of the move. Removing Discovery from the Udvar-Hazy Center and transporting it to another location would be very complicated and expensive, and likely result in irreparable damage to the shuttle and its components, the spokesperson warned. Given the shuttle's age and condition, any mishandling poses significant risks. On the other hand, some private companies claim they can transport the shuttle for much less, around $8 million, according to preliminary estimates cited in the CRS report. However, these figures often exclude additional expenses like preparation work, potential disassembly, or infrastructure upgrades. As details remain unclear, Congress may need to request a comprehensive cost analysis before proceeding further. Space Center Houston, the likely destination if the shuttle moves, has expressed enthusiasm but hasn't commissioned independent cost assessments yet. Instead, the organization is focused on planning a world-class home for Discovery. Keisha Bullock, Chief Communications Officer at Space Center Houston, noted that hosting the shuttle aligns perfectly with their long-term vision. Yet, critics worry that logistical hurdles could overshadow these aspirations. This battle isn't new. Texas lawmakers have been advocating for Discovery's return since its retirement. They point to a clause in the 2010 NASA Authorization Act, prioritizing locations with historical ties to the shuttle program. Despite their arguments, Discovery ended up in Virginia due to a 1967 agreement between NASA and the Smithsonian mandating that all historically significant artifacts developed by NASA belong in the National Air and Space Museum. The resistance doesn't stop there. Last week, House appropriators adopted an amendment barring the use of Smithsonian funds for the transfer. Introduced by Representative Joseph D. Morell, the measure passed via voice vote, signaling bipartisan concern. Morell argued that removing Discovery sets a dangerous precedent, warning that it undermines the Smithsonian's role as custodian of America's collective heritage. While it's uncertain whether Smithsonian funds are even necessary, the symbolic weight of this amendment cannot be ignored. Meanwhile, grassroots opposition is growing. An advocacy group called Keep the Shuttle, founded by Joe Stieff, is rallying against the move. Stieff, who married in front of Discovery, acknowledges his personal connection, but insists his concerns extend beyond sentimentality. He highlights three key issues: cost, logistics, and precedent. Moving the shuttle presents enormous challenges, including the lack of suitable aircraft. The modified 747s, once used, are now retired, and potential damage during transit. For instance, when Endeavour traveled to Los Angeles in 2012, hundreds of trees were cut down, and streets required reinforcement to protect underground utilities. And this is the part most people miss. If Congress allows two senators to redirect a national artifact for political gain, What stops others from doing the same? Could we see a domino effect where states vie for prized pieces of American history? What safeguards should exist to prevent misuse of public resources? So, dear reader, where do you stand? Is Houston the rightful home for Discovery, or does it belong in the nation's capital as part of our shared heritage? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. Space Shuttle Discovery move to cost over $300 million. Imagine a price tag of over $300 million just to move a historic space shuttle. Sounds outrageous, right? But that's exactly what a recent congressional report suggests it could cost to relocate the iconic Space Shuttle Discovery from the Smithsonian Udvar-Hazy Center to Space Center Houston in Texas. This proposal, championed by Texas Senators Ted Cruz and John Cornyn, has sparked a heated debate over priorities, costs, and the shuttle's rightful home. And here's where it gets controversial. While the initial budget allocated a modest $80 million for the move, the actual expenses could skyrocket to more than 4 times that amount. So, is this a worthy investment or a costly political favor? Let's dive in. Back in 2012, the Discovery Shuttle was moved to the Smithsonian in Chantilly, Virginia, after NASA's flight program ended. The event was a spectacle, with the shuttle piggybacking on a specially fitted 747 and flying over Washington, D.C., to the delight of space enthusiasts. But now, Texas lawmakers argue that Houston, home to NASA's Johnson Space Center, deserves to house the shuttle, calling it a return home. Senator Cornyn even claimed that the Obama administration unfairly blocked Houston from receiving this recognition. But here's the part most people miss. The shuttle wasn't built or launched in Houston, raising questions about the historical connection. The Congressional Research Service, CRS, report released in July 2025 paints a stark picture. Moving the shuttle alone could cost between $50 and $55 million, far exceeding the $5 million initially set aside for transport. Add in preparation costs and building a new facility, and the total jumps to a staggering $325 million. The Smithsonian Institution warns that Discovery, now over 40 years old, is fragile and requires specialized handling, further complicating the move. One estimate suggests transporting it by ground and barge could cost $8 million alone. But why the massive price difference? The report highlights that the budget's wording makes authorizing the move tricky, and the Smithsonian holds all rights, title, interest, and ownership of the shuttle. Meanwhile, Congress is still debating how to fund this endeavor, with 2 bills pending that would require NASA's administrator to oversee the transfer. However, it's unclear if NASA even has the authority to direct such a move, given the Smithsonian's independent status. This raises a thought-provoking question. Is relocating Discovery worth the astronomical cost? Or should it remain at the Smithsonian, where millions of visitors have already marveled at its legacy? Do political favors outweigh historical preservation and financial responsibility? Share your thoughts in the comments. This debate is far from over.